I stared at my 9-year-old daughter's empty plate, then at my mother-in-law's smug face as she whispered, "She's just a girl, Sarah. She can eat the scraps. Or she can go hungry." That night, my daughter cried herself to sleep with a stomach growling in the dark. But Grandma didn't realize one thing. Today is the night of the grand family reunion, and while the house smells of the finest feast I've ever cooked, Grandma is about to learn exactly what an empty stomach feels like in front of everyone she knows. You see, she thinks she's the queen of this house, but she's about to find out that when you starve my child, you lose your seat at the table. Literally. Wait until you see the look on her face when I set down her plate and the entire room goes dead silent. My name is Sarah, and I have spent years trying to maintain peace in a house where my mother-in-law, Mrs. Rose, rules with an iron fist. But my heart broke into a million pieces when I saw how she treated my 9-year-old daughter, Harper, to the world. Mrs. Rose is a sophisticated woman, but inside our kitchen, she is a monster of tradition and bias. She firmly believes that girls should be humble and eat whatever is left over, as if being born a female makes you second class. Every night, I noticed Harper looking at her plate with sadness. While the men of the house were served fresh, steaming rice and the best cuts of meat, Harper's plate was often filled with the burnt edges of the bread or the cold, watery remains of the gravy. Grandma would look at her and say with a smirk, "You are a girl, Harper. You shouldn't have such high demands or tantrums." One rainy Tuesday, I was late coming home from work, and I found Harper sitting in the dark corner of the kitchen. Her plate was completely empty because Grandma had decided that Harper didn't deserve a fresh meal since she hadn't finished her chores fast enough. "She needs to learn the value of a grain," Grandma told me, her voice cold and devoid of any grandmotherly warmth. Harper didn't complain. She didn't cry. She just looked at me with hollow eyes and whispered that she wasn't hungry anymore. My daughter went to sleep on an empty stomach that night, and as I watched her small frame curl up in bed, I felt a fire ignite in my soul. I realized that my silence was making me an accomplice to this cruelty. And I decided that tomorrow, the cycle of empty plates would finally come to a crashing end. The next evening was the perfect opportunity for my plan, because it was our annual family reunion dinner. Our house was filled with the aroma of slow-cooked lamb, saffron rice, and sweet desserts. More than 20 relatives were gathered in the dining hall, and at the head of the table sat Mrs. Rose, looking like a queen in her pearls. She was basking in the compliments of the guests, bragging about how she manages the household with such traditional values. I spent the entire afternoon in the kitchen, pouring my sweat and tears into making the most magnificent feast anyone had ever seen. Every guest was served on fine china, their plates overflowing with the best portions of the meal. I made sure to serve Harper first, giving her a plate that looked like it belonged to a princess, filled with all her favorite things. Grandma watched this with a disapproving glare, her lips thinning as she prepared to make a sharp comment about spoiling the girl. She sat there with her fork and knife ready, waiting for me to bring her the golden platter I had prepared. The guests were all eating and praising the food, their faces glowing with satisfaction. But when I reached Grandma, I didn't place a mountain of food in front of her. Instead, I set down a cold, porcelain plate that was completely and utterly empty. The clinking of silverware slowly died down as one by one the relatives noticed the blank space in front of the matriarch of the family. Mrs. Rose looked down at the empty white circle, then up at me, her eyes flashing with a mix of confusion and building rage. She thought I had made a mistake, but the steady look in my eyes told her that every empty inch of that plate was intentional. The silence in the room became so heavy you could hear the ticking of the clock in the hallway. My husband looked at me, confused, and asked, "Sarah, where is Mom's dinner? Did you forget the main tray?" I took a slow, deep breath and stood at the end of the table so everyone could see me. I didn't scream or shout. Instead, I spoke with a calm, chilling clarity that cut through the air. I looked directly at my mother-in-law and said, "Today, I decided to follow the tradition Grandma has been teaching my daughter for months." I explained to the shocked relatives how Harper had been fed scraps and leftovers, while everyone else ate like royalty. I told them about the night before, how a 9-year-old child had been sent to bed with a stomach growling from hunger. Because she was just a girl, who didn't deserve nukre. Grandma's face turned a deep, humiliated purple as she realized her private cruelty was being dragged into the bright light of public judgment. I am serving you exactly what you serve my daughter, I continued, my voice never wavering. From this day forward, in this house, only those who know how to fill the stomachs of others will have their own plates filled. The guests were horrified, whispering among themselves as they looked from the beautiful feast to the empty plate in front of the woman they once respected. Mrs. Rose tried to speak, to defend herself, to call me disrespectful. But she had no words that could erase the truth. She had used food as a weapon against a child, and now, that same weapon was pointed back at her in front of everyone she cared about. Grandma tried to stand up, her hands shaking with indignation. How dare you humiliate me in my own home? She hissed. But her voice lacked its usual power, because the weight of the empty plate was too heavy to lift. I looked at her with a pity that hurt more than anger. This isn't about humiliation, Mrs. Rose. This is about reflection, I told her. You told Harper that nakri don't suit a girl. Well, I think hunger doesn't suit a grandmother. The relatives, who had always seen her as the pillar of the family, now saw her as a bully who picked on a little girl. My husband walked over to me, and for a moment, I thought he might defend his mother. But instead, he looked at Harper's plate and then at the empty one, and he simply sat back down. His silence was the ultimate blow to her ego. She was trapped in the very cage she had built for my daughter. The luxury of the dining room, the expensive clothes, and the fancy guests couldn't hide the fact that she was being treated with the same cold indifference she had shown to a child. Tears of frustration and shame began to well up in her eyes, not because she was sorry, but because she had lost her power. She looked around the table for an ally, but everyone avoided her gaze. They were all thinking about the times they had eaten while Harper sat in the corner with a tiny bowl of cold scraps. The lesson was loud and clear. If the youngest and most innocent member of the family wasn't worthy of a full plate, then neither was the oldest. Just as the tension reached its breaking point, and the atmosphere became too bitter to bear, something unexpected happened. Harper, who had been sitting quietly through the entire ordeal, stood up from her chair. The room went silent again as she walked, slowly toward her grandma with her own plate in her hands. We all expected her to say something mean or to gloat in the revenge. But Harper is not like her grandmother. She reached the head of the table, took a piece of the fresh bread I had baked for her, and broke it in half. She placed the largest piece on Grandma's empty plate, along with a generous portion of the lamb. You must be very hungry, Grandma, Harper said, her voice sweet and genuine. Mommy says that when we share, our hearts get full, and I don't want your heart to be empty anymore. The entire room gasped, and I felt tears finally prickling my own eyes. Rose froze as she looked at the food given to her by the very child she had tried to starve. The kindness of the 9-year-old was 1,000 times more painful than my empty plate had been. Grandma looked at the bread, then at Harper's innocent face, and she finally broke down into real, sobbing tears of regret. She realized that while she was trying to teach Harper the value of a grain, Harper was teaching her the value of a soul. That night, the revenge was complete, but the healing had just begun. Grandma never looked at Harper's plate with anything but love after that day. And I learned that sometimes a mother has to clear the table so that a child can teach the family how to truly eat together.